This is the third time trying to record it. I literally read a page and I messed up about 50 times, so I was like, we'll just try again. I don't know where we left off last time, so I'm going to guess it was here. When he got back, Barlin and Dwalin were talking at the table like old friends. As a matter of fact, they were brothers. Bilbo plumped down the beer and cake in front of them when loud came a ring at the bell again, and then another ring. Gandalf for certain this time, he thought, as he puffed along the passage, but it was not. It was two more dwarfs, both with a blue hood, silver belts, and yellow beard, and each one of them carried a bag of tools and a spade. In they hopped as soon as the door began to open. Bilbo was hardly surprised at all. "What can I do for you, my dwarfs?" he said. "Kylie at your service," said one, and Philly, added the other, and they both swept off their blue hoods and bowed. "At yours and your family's," replied Bilbo, remembering his manners this time. "Dwalin and Balin are already here, I see," said Kylie. "Let's join them throng." "Throng?" thought Mr. Baggins. "I don't like the sound of that, and I really must sit down for a minute and collect my wits and have a drink." He had only just had a sip in the corner while the four dwarfs sat round the table and talked about mines and gold and troubles with the goblins and of dragons and lots of other things which he did not understand and did not want to, for they sounded too adventurous, when at his bell rang again, as if some naughty little Hobbit boy was trying to pull the handle off. "Someone at the door," he said, blinking. Some four, I should say, by the sound," said Philly. "Besides, we saw them coming along behind us in the distance." The poor little Hobbit sat down in the hall and put his head in his hands and wondered what had happened, and what was going to happen, and whether they would all stay for supper. And then the bell rang again, louder than ever, and he had to run to the door, for it was not 4 at all, it was 5. Another dwarf had come along while he was wandering in the hall. He had hardly turned the knob before they were all inside, bowing and saying, "At your service," one after the other. Dory, Nori, Ori, Orin, and Gloin were their names, and very soon 2 purple hoods, a grey hood, a brown hood, and a white hood were hanging on the pegs, and off they marched with their broad hands stuck in their gold and silver belts to join the others. Already it had almost become a throng. Some called for ale, and some for port, and one for coffee, and all of them for cakes, so the Hobbit was kept very busy for a while. A big jug of coffee had just been set in the hearth. The cedar cakes were gone, and the dwarfs were starting on a round of buttered scones, when there came a loud knock, not a ring, but a hard knock on the Hobbit's beautiful green door. Somebody was banging with a stick. Bilbo rushed along the passageway, very angry and altogether bewildered and bored. This was the most awkward Wednesday he ever remembered. He pulled open the door with a jerk, and they all fell in, one on top of the other. More dwarfs, 4 more, and there was Gandalf behind, leaning on his staff and laughing. He had made quite a dent on the beautiful door. He had also, by the way, knocked out the secret mark that he'd put there the morning before. Carefully, carefully," he said. "It's not like you, Bilbo, to keep friends waiting on the mat and then open the door like that. A pop gun. Let me introduce Burf, Boff, Bomber, and especially Thorin." Why are their names so complicated to say? So short, but I can't pronounce them. "At your service," said the dwarfs, standing in a row. Then they hung up 2 yellow hoods and a pale green one, and also a sky blue one with a long silver tassel. This last one belonged to Thorin, an enormously important dwarf. In fact, no other than the great Thorin Oakenshield himself, who was not all that pleased at falling flat on Bilbo's mat, with Bilfer, Borfer, and Bomber on top of him. For one thing, Bomber was immensely fat and heavy. Thorin, indeed, was very haughty and said nothing about service, but poor Mr. Baggins said he was sorry so many times that at last he grunted, "Pray don't mention it," and stopped frowning. "Now we're all here," said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods, the best detachable party hoods, and his own hat hanging on the pegs. "Quite a merry gathering. I hope there is some left for the late comers and to eat and drink. What's that, tea?" "No, thank you. A little red wine, I think, for me." "And for me," said Thorine. "And raspberry jam and apple tarts," said Bilfer. "And mince pies and cheese," said Bofer. "And pork pies and salad," said Bomber. "And more cakes and ale and coffee, if you don't mind," called the other dwarfs through the door. "Put on a few eggs, there's a good fellow," Gandalf called after him as the hobbit stumped off to the pantry. "And just bring out the cold chicken and pickles. Seems to know as much about the inside of my largers as I do myself," thought Mr. Baggins. He was feeling positively
I read at a kid's level. Let's be honest.
flummoxed, and was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched adventure had not only come right on into his house by the time he had got all the bottles and dishes and the knives and forks and glasses and plates and spoons and things piled up on big trays. He was getting very hot and red in the face and annoyed. "Confusticate and bewildered, these dwarfs," he said aloud. "Why don't they come and lend a hand?" Lo and behold, there stood Balin and Dwalin at the door of the kitchen, and Philly and Killy behind them. Before they could say knife, they had whiskey trays and a couple of small tables into the parlour and set out everything afresh. Gandalf sat at the head of the party, with the 13 dwarfs all around, and Bilbo sat on the stool at the fireside nibbling at a biscuit. His appetite was quite taken away, and trying to look as if it was all perfectly ordinary, not in the least adventure. The dwarfs ate and talked, and time got on. At last they passed their chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect their plates and glasses. "I suppose you're all staying to supper," he said in his polite, impressed tones. "Of course," said Thorin, "and after. We shan't get through the business till late, and we must have some music first. Now to clear up." Thereupon the dwarfs, not Thorin, he was too important, and stayed to talk with Gandalf, jumped to their feet and made tall piles of all the things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with the bottle on top, with one hand, while the hobbit ran after them, almost squeaking in fright. "Please be careful, and please don't trouble. I can manage," but the dwarfs only started singing. I'm absolutely not singing that. I'll read it. "Chip the glasses and crack the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. Smash the bottles and burn the corks. Cut the cloths and tread on the fat. Pour the milk on the pantry floor. Leave the bones on the bedroom mat. Splash the wine on every door. Dump the corks in a boiling bottle. Ponder them up with thumping pole. And when you've finished, if any are whole, send them down the hall to roll. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates, so carefully with the plates." And of course they did none of these dreaded things, and everything was cleaned up and put away safe as quick as lightning, while the hobbit was turned around and around in the middle of the kitchen trying to see what they were doing. Then they went back and found Thorin with his feet on the fender smoking a pipe. He was blowing the most enormous smoke rings, and whenever he told one to go, it went up the chimney, or behind the clock in the mantelpiece, or under the table, or around and around the ceiling. But wherever it went, it was not quick enough to escape Gandalf. Pop! He sent the smaller smoke rings from a shorter clay pipe straight through each one of Thorin's. Then Gandalf's smoke ring would go green and come back to hover over the wizard's head. He had a cloud of them above him already, and in this dim light it made him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood and watched. He loved smoke rings, and then he blushed to think how proud he would have been yesterday morning of the smoke rings he had sent up the wind over the hill. "Now for some music," said Thorin. "Bring out the instruments." Oh my god, there's another song. Gilly and Philly rushed for their bags and brought back little fiddles. Dory, Nori, and Ori brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Bomber produced a drum from the hall. Bilbo and Bofo went out too and came back with clarinets that they had left among the walking sticks. Dwalin and Barlin said, "Excuse me, I left mine in the porch." "Just bring mine in, will you?" said Thorin. They came back with violas as big as themselves and with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was a beautiful golden harp and a suite that Bilbo forgot everything else that was swept away into the dark lands under the strange moon, far over the waters and very far from his hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room from the little window that was opened in the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April, and they still played on while the shadow of Gandalf's beard waggled against the wall. The dark filled all the room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on. And suddenly, first one then another began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the dwarfs in the deep place of their ancient homes. And this is like a fragment of their song, if it can be like their song without their music. Far over the misty mountains, cold the dungeons, deep in canvas old, we must away ere break of day to seek pale enchanted gold, the dwarf of your made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells. In places deep where dark things sleep in hollow walls beneath the fleets. For ancient kings and elvish lords, there many a gleaming golden hoard. They shape and wore and light they caught to hide in gems on the hilt of sword. On silver necklaces they swung, the flowering stars on crowns they hung, the dragon's fire in twisted wire. They meshed the light of moon and sun, fire in misty mountains, cold to dungeons deep in canvas old. We must away ere break of day to claim our long forgotten gold. Goblets they carved there for themselves, and harps of gold where no man dwells. There lay long and many a song was sung and heard by men or elves. These pines were roving on the height, and the winds were moaning in the night. The fire was red, the flaming spread, the trees like torches blazed with light. The bells were ringing in the dale, and the men looked up with faces pale. Then the dragon's ire, more fierce than fire, laid low their towers and houses frail. The mountains smoked beneath the moon, and the dwarves they heard the tramp of doom. They fled their hall to dying fall beneath his feet, beneath the moon. Far over the misty mountains, grim to dungeons deep and canvas dim, we must away ere day could break, to win our harps and gold for him. They sang the Hobbit, fell in love with the beautiful things made by hands and by cunning and by magic and moving through him. A fierce and jealous love, the desire hearts of dwarfs. Then something tookish woke up inside him, and he wished to go see the great mountains and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls and explore the caves and wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out the window. The stars are out in the dark sky. The stars are out in the dark sky above the trees. He thought of the jewels and the dwarfs shining in the dark caverns. Suddenly, the wood beyond the water, a flame leapt up. Probably someone lighting a wood fire. He thought of the plundering dragon setting down a quiet hill and kindling it. All to flames. He shuddered, and very quickly he was playing Mr. Baggins, a bag end under the hill. Then he got up trembling. He had less than half a mind to fetch the lamp, and more than half a mind to pretend to, and go and hide behind the bare barrels in the cellar, and not only come out again until the dwarfs had gone away. Suddenly he found the music, and the singing had stopped, and they were all looking at him, eyes shining in the dark. "Where are you going?" said Thorin, in a tone that seemed to show he guessed both half of the hobbits' minds. "What about the little lights?" said Bilbo apologetically. "We like the dark," said the dwarfs. "Dark for dark business." There are many hours before dawn. Of course, said Bilbo, and sat down in a hurry. He missed the stool and sat on a fender, knocking over the poker and the shovel with a crash. Hush, said Gandalf. Let Thorin speak. And this is how Thorin began. Gandalf, dwarves, and Mr. Baggins. We are met together in the house of our friend and fellow conspirator, this most excellent, unaudacious hobbit. May the hair on his toes never fall out. All praise to his wine and ale. He paused for a breath and politely remarked the hobbit, but the compliments were quite lost on poor Bilbo Baggins, who was wagging his mouth in protest to being called audacent. Worst of all, falling conspirator, though no noise came out, he was so flummoxed. So Thorin went on. We are met to discuss our plans, our ways, our mean, our policy and devices. We shall soon, before the break of day, start on our long journey, a journey from which some of us, or perhaps all of us, except our friend and counsellor, the ingenious Wizard Gandalf, may never return. It is a solemn moment, our objective is, and I take it well known to us, to estimate Mr. Baggins, and perhaps to one or two younger dwarfs. I think I should be right in naming Killy and Frilly, for instance, in the exact situation at the moment may require a little brief explanation. This was Thorin's style. He was an important dwarf. If he had been allowed, he would have probably gone on like this until he was out of breath without telling anyone that anything was not known already. But he was readily interrupted. Poor Bilbo couldn't bear it any longer. At May never return, he began to feel a shriek coming up inside, and very soon it burst out like a whistle of an engine coming out of a tunnel. All the dwarfs sprang up, knocking over the table. Gandalf struck a blue light on the end of his magic staff, and in its fireworks glare the poor hobbit could be seen kneeling on the heath roof, shaking like a jelly that was melting. Then he fell flat on the floor and kept calling out, struck by lightning, over and over again. That was all they could get out of him for a long time. So they took him and laid him out of the way on the drawing room sofa with a drink in his elbow, and they went back to their dark business. Excitable little fellow, said Gandalf as they sat down again. Gets funny queer fits, but he's one of the best, as fierce as a dragon in a pinch. If you've ever seen a dragon in a pinch, you will realise this is only political exaggeration applied to any hobbit. Even old Tuck's great-grand-uncle, Borora, who was so huge for a hobbit that he could ride a horse, he began to charge the ranks of the goblins Mount Graham in the Battle of the Greenfields, and knocked their king Golfinball's head off with a clean wooden club. It sailed 100 yards through the air and went down a rabbit hole, and in this way the battle was won, and the game golf invented at the same moment. In the meanwhile, however, Borora's gentle descent was a reviver into the drawing room, while as he drank and crept nervously to the door of the parlour. It was to be heard a golfin speak, or something snort more or less like that. Will he do? Do you think it is very well for Gandalf to talk about a hobbit being fierce, but one shriek like that in the moment of excitement would be enough to wake a dragon and all its relatives and kill the lot of us. I think it sounded more like a fright than excitement. In fact, if it had not been for the sign on the door, I should have been sure we had come to the wrong house as soon as I clasped eyes into the little fellow bobbing and puffing on the mat. I have had my doubts. He looked more like a grocer than a burglar. Then Mr. Baggins turned the handle and went in. The Tuck side had won, and finally felt he would go without bed and breakfast to be thought fierce. As for a little fellow bobbing on the mat, it almost made him really fierce. Many time after, Baggins would regret what he did now, and said to himself, Bilbo, you were a fool. You walked in and put your foot in it. Pardon me, he said. If I have overheard the words that you were saying, I don't pretend to understand what you are thinking about, or your reference to burglars, but I think I am right in believing, this is what being called an indignity, that you think I am no good. I will show you. I have a sign on my door, and it was painted a week ago, and I am quite sure that you have come to the wrong house. As soon as I saw your funny faces at the doorstep, I had my doubts, but treat it as the right one. Tell me you want done, and I will try it. If I have to walk from here to the east of the east and fight the wild werewolves in the last desert, I had a great granduncle once, Aurora took, and yes, but that was a long time ago, said Glory. I was talking about you, and I assure you there is a mark on the door. That usual one in trade ought to be used. Burglar wants a good job, plenty of excitement and reasonable reward. That's how it is usually read. You can say expert treasure hunter instead of burglar if you like, but some of them do. It's all the same to us. Gandalf told us that you were a man of the sort in these parts looking for a job at once, and that he had arranged for a meeting inside here on Wednesday tea time. Of course there is a mark, said Gandalf. I put it there myself for a very good reason. You've asked me to find the 14th man for your expeditions. I choose Mr. Baggins. Just let anyone say I choose the wrong man or the wrong house, and you can stop at the 13th, and we'll all have bad luck. Or go back to digging coal. He scowled so angrily at Gollum that the dwarf huddled back in the chair. When Bilbo tried to open his mouth to ask a question, he turned and frowned at him and stuck out his bushy eyebrows till Bilbo shut his mouth with a tight snap. That's right, said Gandalf. Let's have no more arguments. I've chosen Mr. Baggins, and that ought to be enough for all of you. If I say he's a burglar he is, or will be when the time comes. There's a lot more in him than you guess, it deals more to any idea of yourself. You may possibly live to thank me yet. Now, Bilbo, my boy, fetch the lamp and let's have a little light on this. On the table, in the light of a big lamp with a red shade, he spread a piece of parchment rather like a map. This was made by Thorin, your grandfather Thorin, he said to answer the dwarf's exciting question. It is a plan of the mountains. I don't see that this will help us much, said Thorin disappointedly after a glance. I remember the mountain well enough and learned about it, and I know where Mirkwood is, and Withering Heath where the great dragons bred. There is no dragon marked on this red mountain, said Borlin, but it will be easy enough to find without that if you were ever to arrive there. There is one point you haven't noticed, said the wizard, and that's a secret entrance. You will see the rune on the west side, a hand painting to it, and the other runes. Like this marks a hidden passage to the lower halls. Look at the map at the beginning of this book. Oh, right. I guess I'll try and find a photo to show you while I look at this. Oh, yeah. Cool. Probably won't put it in there, but yeah, I guess I'll leave it here. So remember. Hope you enjoyed today's reading of The Hobbit. More will come soon. Yeah. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There are 9 pages until chapter 2. It takes a very long time to read a chapter, and I'm very sorry about that.